Section 1. The Nuclear Mutation Theory. Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull the blanket up a little. Dim the screen if you need to. Tonight we are going somewhere that is both deeply familiar and, once you start looking at it the right way, genuinely unsettling. We are going to Springfield. The Simpsons has been on the air since December 17th, 1989, 36 seasons, 788 episodes. It is the longest-running American animated series in history, the longest-running sitcom, the longest-running scripted primetime show that has ever existed. And in all that time, across every single one of those episodes, not one person in Springfield has aged a single day. Bart Simpson is still 10 years old. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still quietly working on that same pacifier. Homer still shuffles into the same nuclear power plant every morning for the same ancient billionaire who has never once correctly remembered his name. Everything in Springfield persists in this strange, amber-colored suspension. The same streets, the same faces, the same cracked cooling towers on the horizon. Most people accept this and move on. It is a cartoon. Cartoons do not age. That is the explanation the world has quietly agreed upon and then stopped thinking about. But tonight, we are not going to stop thinking about it. Because when you sit with Springfield long enough, when you let the details accumulate without rushing past them, the picture that emerges is far stranger and far more coherent than anything the show has ever directly told you. So let us start from the very beginning. Let us start with the one theory that, when you hold it up to the light, seems to explain almost everything. The Springfield nuclear power plant is poisoning the town, not as a metaphor, not as satire about corporate negligence, though it is certainly that too. Literally, chemically, biologically poisoning every single person who lives within its reach. And the evidence the show has been stacking up for over 3 decades is, by any reasonable measure, overwhelming. The plant itself is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire community, which means every light that flickers on in Springfield, every television set, every refrigerator humming in every kitchen, is powered by this place. The town is completely and utterly dependent on it. And the plant, by any standard of measurement you care to apply, is one of the most dangerous industrial facilities ever depicted in fiction. A surprise safety inspection once turned up 342 violations. 342. Think about what that number actually represents. That is not a few missed maintenance checks. That is not some paperwork filed incorrectly. That is a facility in a state of comprehensive, systemic, catastrophic failure across nearly every measurable safety category. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Burns refused to spend it. Not because he could not afford it. The man is a billionaire many times over. He refused because fixing the problems would require acknowledging that the problems existed. And acknowledging that the problems existed would mean someone might start asking questions about what those problems had already done to the people living downwind. The violations themselves are not minor. We are talking about radioactive waste being pumped directly into bodies of water, radioactive waste being dumped onto children's playgrounds, plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk, cooling towers with cracks in them that have been patched with wad of chewing gum, luminous rats running through the walls of the facility, glowing faintly in the dark, going about their business among the pipes and conduits. And then there is the detail the show delivers and immediately walks away from. Human skeletons in the basement. Not one. Multiple. The bones of people who at some point ended up dead inside an operating nuclear reactor facility and were never removed, never investigated, never acknowledged. The show shows you the bones and moves the camera. Nobody asks who those people were. Nobody asks how they got there. The safety inspector responsible for ensuring none of this ever happens is Homer Simpson, a man the show's own creator has stated has an IQ of 55. A man who, in one episode, discovers that a crayon has been physically lodged in his brain since childhood, directly reducing his cognitive function. A man who has, on multiple documented occasions, fallen asleep at the controls of an active reactor. A man who once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core because he wanted to see if it would come out larger on the other side. That is the person standing between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe, and he has been standing there, in that exact same spot, for over 30 years. The first visible evidence of environmental mutation appears in Season 2. Blinky, the three-eyed fish. Blinky is pulled from a river near the power plant and immediately becomes national news within the show's universe. A candidate running for governor uses Blinky as evidence that Burns is poisoning the local environment. Burns is forced, in a piece of genuinely inspired television, to eat the fish on live television in order to prove it is harmless. The town watches. There is a moment of collective attention, of something approaching awareness, and then it passes. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody tests the water supply. Nobody forms a committee, or calls a scientist, or asks the question that any reasonable person watching a politician eat a three-eyed fish on the evening news might think to ask, which is, if the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people who have been drinking the same water? The show answers this question in Season 8, though it answers it sideways, in a way that most viewers do not fully register. The episode is called The Springfield Files. Homer, wandering through the woods near the power plant one evening, encounters something that terrifies him completely. A figure, glowing, moving with a strange, dazed, otherworldly quality. Homer becomes convinced he has seen an alien. The FBI sends agents. The town panics. The episode builds with genuine comedic momentum toward what feels like it will be a big, absurd reveal. And the reveal, when it comes, is not a joke at all. Not really. The glowing figure in the woods is Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so saturated with radiation and experimental compounds, that it causes his entire body to emit visible light afterward. A healthy green glow, as the show describes it. The treatments keep him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without the next dose, he dies. The regimen is so extreme that after each session, Burns wanders out of the facility in a dazed, euphoric state and stumbles through the woods like something from another world. His body literally radiates light. The people of Springfield see this glowing figure, and their first instinct is not to think about the nuclear plant that dominates their skyline. Their first instinct is that it must be an extraterrestrial visitor. That is how thoroughly the town has been conditioned not to connect those particular dots. Then, in the Simpsons movie, the evidence becomes so large it cannot be ignored anymore. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so catastrophic that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's universe, determines that the town must be physically sealed under a massive glass dome to prevent its pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. The United States government looks at Springfield and concludes that the entire town is so toxic, so fundamentally saturated with contamination, that the only viable solution is containment, not cleanup. Not remediation, containment. The way you would contain something you have given up on fixing. Springfield is classified, by the federal government of its own fictional universe, as an environmental hazard zone. And every single resident who has been drinking that water, breathing that air, living in the shadow of those cracked cooling towers for decades, is still inside when the dome comes down. Now look at the residents themselves. Really look at them. Homer Simpson. Massive overbite. Bulging eyes, only 4 fingers on each hand, a skull shape that does not correspond to any recognizable human anatomy, an IQ that qualifies clinically as a cognitive disability, a body that has survived being shot, electrocuted, falling off cliffs, being struck by cars, surviving explosions, and walking away from every single incident with a recuperation speed that simply does not occur in normal human biology. His pain tolerance is inhuman. His healing rate is absurd. He has spent his entire adult working life in direct proximity to an active nuclear reactor core. Marge Simpson. The same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers, hair that defies physics and gravity, growing perfectly vertical in a tower she has maintained in exactly the same shape for 36 years, without product, without visible maintenance, without any explanation. Marge worked at the nuclear power plant herself for a period. She was exposed to the same facility, and all 3 of her children were born after both parents had already been living in Springfield's contaminated environment for years. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie were all born in Springfield. They were all raised in Springfield. They have all been drinking the same water and breathing the same air every single day of their lives. And every one of them displays physical characteristics that simply do not occur in normal human populations. The hair that holds its shape with no product, the pronounced overbites, the enormous, slightly protuberant eyes, the yellow skin. That last detail is the one that makes everything click together. Because here is what the show has been quietly demonstrating for 3.5 decades. When guest characters visit Springfield, when celebrities or outsiders or people from elsewhere in the world appear in an episode, they look different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are shaped more the way eyes actually are. Their features more closely resemble what you would expect a human face to look like. The show draws outsiders with fundamentally more realistic anatomy than it draws Springfield residents. And the explanation that everyone accepts, the comfortable, automatic explanation, is that this is simply the art style. That is how The Simpsons looks. That is what the characters are supposed to look like. But inside the logic of the show's own universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live in Springfield and people who do not. The people inside the contamination zone look mutated. The people outside it look comparatively normal. Even Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners, the same proportions that deviate from real canine anatomy. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. The wildlife around the plant is demonstrably altered. The show tells you this directly. It shows you a 3-eyed fish and says, plainly, this is what the radiation is doing to living organisms in this environment. And then it proceeds, for season after season, as though the exact same radiation has somehow had zero effect on the humans who have been living in that same environment for their entire lives. Burns knows. The show makes this unmistakably clear across multiple episodes. Burns funds private medical research. He has personal physicians. He undergoes those weekly treatments, the ones that keep his diseases in equilibrium and make his body glow afterward. Burns understands radiation at a biological, intimate, personal level that nobody else in Springfield comes close to, because he is personally dependent on managing its effects in his own body. He has the resources to understand exactly what his plant is doing to the surrounding population. He has the pharmaceutical infrastructure to develop and administer treatments that no ordinary Springfield resident could ever access. He knows what radiation does to biological systems, because radiation is, in a very literal sense, what keeps him alive. And Homer's continued employment is not negligence on Burns's part. It is not forgetfulness. It is strategy. When German investors briefly purchased the plant during one episode, the very first thing they did was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess what it would actually cost to bring the facility up to code, and they nearly went bankrupt from the estimate alone. Burns bought the plant back and rehired Homer immediately. A competent safety inspector would shut that plant down within a week. Homer, stumbling through his days, eating donuts, sleeping at his console, ensures that the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking, the water supply stays contaminated, and Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power, its economy, and by extension, the cognitive function of its entire population. The crayon in Homer's brain is the detail that ties this all together. In season 12, Homer has the crayon removed. His IQ immediately climbs to genius level. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding the world around him with a clarity he has never experienced. And it makes him miserable. He sees Springfield for what it really is. He sees his job for what it really is. He sees the architecture of his own life with the kind of painful precision that intelligence, genuine intelligence, always brings. It is unbearable. So he has the crayon put back. He chooses the fog. He chooses not to know. But the question the show never actually asks is, how did a crayon end up lodged in a child's brain in the first place? How did Homer go through his entire childhood, his adolescence, his adult life, visiting doctors in Springfield, getting checkups from Springfield medical professionals, and not one of them ever found a foreign object inside his skull? Either every doctor in Springfield is incompetent beyond any reasonable explanation, or someone knew it was there and chose not to remove it. And if the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised, if the doctors are looking the other way while radiation eats through their patients' neurons, if Burns's influence extends into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he essentially owns, then Homer's crayon is not just a strange accident. It is a symbol the show is using to tell you something it cannot quite bring itself to say directly. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains. Something that keeps them slow and compliant and incapable of looking up at those cracked cooling towers and asking the most fundamental question available to them. Why are we all like this? The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them. The characters do not age because their mutated biology has been altered at the cellular level in ways that interrupt normal aging processes. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's memory function is compromised by chronic neurological damage. Homer survives injuries that should kill him because his body has adapted to environmental radiation in ways that make him nearly indestructible, even as they have left him cognitively devastated. Burns stays alive through his weekly treatments because he has been managing his own radiation exposure for over a century, with resources that nobody else in town could ever access. And nobody in Springfield questions any of this, because the same environmental contamination that mutated their bodies has also damaged the part of their minds responsible for asking questions. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. It is a contamination zone with a zip code and a high school. The residents are not eccentric, they are symptomatic. And the power plant that dominates their skyline, that lights their homes, that employs their neighbors and poisons their water and irradiates their children, is not background scenery. It is the cause. It has always been the cause. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, it all traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible contamination into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged brains that cannot work out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children were born with only 4 fingers. If you are still awake, drop a comment with your time and where you are watching from. And if this kind of deep dive is something you want more of, subscribing helps more than you might think. Now, let us keep going. Section 2, Homer's Coma Theory. Now that you have settled a little deeper into wherever you are, let us take everything we just established about Springfield and hold it up against a different kind of light. Because there is a theory, one of the most discussed, most debated, most internally consistent theories in the entire history of Simpsons fandom that reframes everything, not just the radiation. Not just Burns, everything. What if Springfield is not real? Not in the sense that it is a cartoon, which of course it is. What if, within the logic of the show's own universe, Springfield, as we have come to know it, exists entirely inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since 1993? This is the Homer coma theory, and it begins with an episode. On April 1st, 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The setup is simple enough. Bart plays a series of escalating April Fool's pranks on Homer, culminating in one that goes spectacularly wrong. Bart takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opens the can later, the resulting explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. While lying in his hospital bed, Homer spots a vending machine across the room. He reaches for it. The machine tips, it falls on him, and Homer Simpson flatlines and enters a clinical coma. This is not a dream sequence. It is not played as a cutaway gag. It is presented as a real event within the show's continuity. Homer enters an unconscious state that lasts for 7 weeks in the episode's timeline. The show then tells us he wakes up. Bart, tearful and guilt-ridden, confesses at his bedside that the whole thing was his fault, and Homer springs awake and immediately begins strangling his son. The family laughs. Everything goes back to normal. The audience is told the coma is over. But in the final moments of that same episode, before the credits roll, Homer is informed that he has suffered a permanent loss of 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%? Gone. Destroyed. Never coming back. And Homer's response to learning he is permanently brain damaged is to laugh, even as he admits he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The episode ends. The Simpsons continues for 32 more years as if nothing happened. Unless nothing did happen. Unless Homer never woke up at all. The basic premise of the coma theory, originally proposed by a Reddit user posting under the name Hard to Pick a Name, is this. Homer did not regain consciousness in April of 1993. Every single episode that has aired since that date, every storyline, every character development, every impossible event, every celebrity guest, every global adventure, every act of God and man in cartoon physics, is a dream being generated by the mind of a man in a hospital bed at Springfield General, slowly losing brain function while his family sits beside him and waits for him to open his eyes. The evidence for this, when you lay it out carefully, is genuinely difficult to explain away. Before the coma, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic in the way a documentary is realistic, but grounded in the recognizable texture of family life. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers whether she is happy in her marriage. Lisa develops an intense, awkward crush on a substitute teacher. Bart faces the possibility of being held back a year at school and has to genuinely grapple with what that means. These are domestic situations. They are rooted in the kind of anxiety and tension that real families actually experience. Financial stress, marital uncertainty, the grinding difficulty of raising children who are not turning out quite the way you hoped. The emotional core of those early seasons was built on relatable human struggle, filtered through satire. After the coma, everything changes. The shift is not subtle. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society. Homer discovers his mother, whom he believed to be dead, is actually a fugitive radical who has been hiding for decades. Homer meets God. Then he meets God again. He travels to dozens of countries. He holds somewhere in the vicinity of 200 different jobs over the course of the series. He befriends dozens of celebrities. He survives physical trauma on a scale that would kill, quite literally, any human being on Earth. The show transforms from a grounded family sitcom into something increasingly surreal, increasingly disconnected from any recognizable version of cause and effect. The internet has been debating when The Simpsons got bad for 20 years. The coma theory offers an answer that is uncomfortably precise. The Simpsons did not get bad. Homer's brain got worse. And as his brain deteriorates, still lying on that hospital bed in 1993, the dream it is generating becomes increasingly unmoored from reality. The early dream episodes are grounded because Homer's brain is still fresh, still relatively intact, still generating scenarios that hew close to his actual lived experience. As the years pass, as the brain damage compounds, the dream grows stranger, the plot logic loosens, the laws of physics bend further. The celebrity cameos multiply because Homer's brain is now picking up ambient fragments from whatever is on the television in his hospital room and weaving them into the simulation. There is a detail that predates the coma episode that makes this theory feel almost prophetic. 6 months before Homer goes into the coma, in the season 4 premiere called Homer the Heretic, Homer has a face-to-face conversation with God, an actual, canonical, on-screen conversation with a deity. And during that conversation, God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God says Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline lines up with uncomfortable precision. God told Homer that his conscious life was nearly at its end. And 6 months after that conversation, Homer's waking mind stopped working. What the show presents as a quirky theological comedy beat reads, through the lens of the coma theory, as a prophecy. God was warning Homer. And Homer, being Homer, did not understand the warning until it was too late. The aging problem is the single piece of evidence the coma theory handles more elegantly than any other explanation ever has. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. This has always been the show's most fundamental and most discussed peculiarity. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. The show uses what the industry calls a floating timeline, where the present of any given episode is always the present moment of the real world. But the characters do not move through time the way the world around them does. Every theory about The Simpsons attempts to address this. The radiation theory says mutated biology has disrupted normal cellular aging. The cartoon logic explanation says this is simply the convention of long-running animated shows and does not require any further analysis. But the coma theory has an answer that cuts deeper than both of those, and it is devastating in its simplicity. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April of 1993 and never woke up. Of course, his children do not grow older. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing up because he was not there to see it happen. His wife does not age because the last time he truly saw her, she looked exactly like that. His friends do not change because his memory of them was frozen at the exact moment the vending machine fell. Homer's coma dream preserves his world precisely as it existed the day he lost it, because that is what a coma does to the mind. It locks the world in place. It preserves the last fully experienced moment in amber. And every episode since April of 1993 is Homer's mind running an increasingly elaborate simulation of a life he is no longer actually living, using the only reference material it has left. The world as it existed on the day he went under. The celebrity appearances make a particular kind of sense through this frame. Homer's coma brain, lying in that hospital bed, is receiving constant sensory input from the environment around it. Sounds from the television in the corner of the room, voices from conversations happening at his bedside, music from a radio somewhere down the hall, names and cultural references filtering through the fog of unconsciousness. His brain hears these fragments and incorporates them into the dream, translating them into characters and guest appearances and encounters in the streets of Springfield. That is why later seasons are so densely populated with celebrity cameos. It is not that Springfield became a magnet for the famous. It is that Homer's deteriorating brain is processing more and more ambient stimulation from the outside world and weaving it into the only story it knows how to tell. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield is a voice Homer heard through the darkness, converted into a dream character by a mind that is trying, with everything it has left, to keep the simulation running. The show itself has acknowledged this theory in a way that is either a direct confirmation or the most elaborate piece of misdirection in television history. In season 34, an episode called Lisa the Boy Scout includes a deliberately leaked, apparently fake deleted scene in which Homer wakes up from a long coma. The scene plays the moment sincerely. Homer opens his eyes. He is confused. The implication is clear. Every outlandish episode we have ever watched was a dream. The internet exploded. And then the show said it was all a hoax. The scene was planted by hackers. It was not real. It was a joke within a meta-reference. But here is what that denial does not account for. The writers made the scene. They wrote it. They animated it. They recorded it. They put it into the world as a piece of content that the audience could engage with. They did not stumble into acknowledging the coma theory. They made a deliberate, creative choice to conjure the exact image the theory had always pointed toward. Homer waking up, the dream ending, the credits on a life rather than an episode. And then they wrapped that image in a layer of plausible deniability and told the audience it was nothing. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it was not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. But what Al Jean did not address, what no official denial has ever addressed, is why nobody ages. Why the tonal shift after season 4 is so dramatic and so abrupt. Why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. Why the show has become progressively more surreal and more disconnected from cause and effect with each passing season, which is precisely the pattern you would expect from a dream being generated by a brain in slow, irreversible decline. He said it is not true and the interviewer moved on. But the fans did not move on because the theory does something that no official explanation has ever managed to do. It makes the whole show make sense. All of it, simultaneously with a single premise. And here is the part that tends to stay with people long after they have closed the thread, long after they have moved on to thinking about something else. If the coma theory is correct, then the emotional center of The Simpsons is not comedy at all, it is tragedy. And not the dark, cynical kind of tragedy. The pure, heartbreaking, human kind. Homer's deepest and most desperate wish is so simple, it is almost impossible to look at directly. He wants his family. That is the whole of it. He wants Marge to love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous, infuriating, beloved little boy. He wants Lisa to play her saxophone at 8 o'clock on a weeknight while he tries to watch television and cannot quite bring himself to tell her to stop. He wants Maggie to be small enough to hold. He wants to live on Evergreen Terrace forever. And in the coma, he does. The dream gives him everything he wants. His children are preserved exactly as he last knew them. His wife has not changed. His house looks the same every time he walks through the door. His life does not end. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the only version of heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye. Because in a dream, goodbye does not mean what it means when you are awake. And every time Homer survives something that should kill him, every time the world resets after a catastrophe, every time the credits roll and everything goes back to normal, it is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream finally stops, then Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed, how old his children really are. Whether Marge is still there, or whether she eventually had to let go and find a way to live her life. Whether anyone is still sitting by the bed. Or, worse, Not waking up at all. That is the coma theory. Homer Simpson has been dreaming since April of 1993. Every episode you have ever watched since that date is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he cannot reach. The show will never confirm it, but it cannot disprove it either, because the evidence is threaded through the structure of the show itself, quietly, patiently, waiting for someone to notice. Nobody ages. Reality keeps getting stranger, and Homer always finds his way home by the end of the episode. Because in his dream, he never left. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Stay where you are. You are doing fine. The room is quiet. We are in no rush. Let the next part come to you slowly. Because this one unfolds like a mystery, and mysteries are best taken at a gentle pace. Before we discuss the shooting, take a moment to appreciate what a remarkable thing the show was attempting in the summer of 1995. The Simpsons was at the absolute peak of its cultural power. It had spent 6 seasons becoming the most discussed, most quoted, most analyzed television program in America. And for its season 6 finale, it decided to do something that no animated series had ever attempted. A genuine, premeditated whodunit. A mystery designed so meticulously, with so many embedded clues and carefully placed red herrings, that the show's creators invited the entire viewing public to participate in solving it before the answer was revealed. Fox promoted the event like a cultural moment. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted, treating the fictional shooting as though it were a real unsolved case. The winner of the guessing contest would be animated into an actual future episode of the show. Thousands upon thousands of entries arrived. The networks and production offices buzzed with the kind of collective excitement that only happens a handful of times in any television era. The mystery was this: Mr. Burns had, by any reasonable measure, gone too far. He had stolen an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary School, stripping the school's budget of funds it desperately needed. He had engineered the financial collapse of Moe's Tavern by ruining Moe economically. He had created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield retirement castle, leaving elderly residents without a home. He had injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, in a car accident he simply drove away from. And as his final and most spectacular act, he built a massive mechanical dish and used it to block out the sun over the entire town of Springfield, so that every resident would be forced to buy electricity from his plant because nothing else would grow and nothing else would work without artificial light. Burns literally stole the sun from the sky above Springfield. When Smithers protested, Burns fired him on the spot. By the end of Part 1, every single person in Springfield had a reason, a genuine and understandable reason, to want Burns dead. Homer, because Burns could not remember his name despite years of working in the same building. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its funding, and their childhoods were diminished by it. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his job. Tito Puente, because Burns cut the music program he had dedicated his professional life to. Moe, because his bar went under. Even Smithers, freshly fired and spiraling into his own private grief, had a motive. The entire town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns. Multiple characters were visibly armed. The tension in that room was real and earned, and it had been building for 2 full seasons. Then Burns was shot. A single gunshot wound. He staggered backward, stumbled onto the town sundial, and fell with his hands landing on 2 specific letters, W and S. Or, from Burns's own perspective, looking up from the ground, M and S. The ambulance came. The screen went dark. America waited through an entire summer. Here is what the show told us when Part 2 finally aired in September of 1995. The investigation plays out as a comedic procedural, with Chief Wiggum fumbling through suspects with his characteristic mix of overconfidence and incompetence. Smithers confesses immediately, dramatically, with the full weight of guilt on his shoulders. But his confession falls apart when the timeline reveals he was blackout drunk at the time and had actually, on that same evening, shot someone else entirely. He shot old Jasper in the wooden leg. Different victim, different location, different crime. Smithers did not shoot Burns. One by one, suspects are eliminated. Skinner has an alibi. Moe has an alibi. Tito Puente has what remains one of the greatest alibis in television history, a full musical number in which he explains that he channeled his rage into a samba rather than an act of violence. The investigation stalls until investigators find an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis confirms it belongs to a Simpson. The evidence points unmistakably toward Homer. His fingerprints are on the gun. He had the most personal motive of anyone in the room. Burns had never once, in years of employment, remembered the name of the man who worked for him every day. Homer is arrested. He is about to be convicted. And then Burns wakes up from his coma. He looks around the hospital room. He identifies his attacker. It was Maggie, baby Maggie Simpson, age 1. According to Burns's account, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the resulting struggle, his gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Mystery solved. Except the mystery was not solved. Not really. And the more carefully you look at the evidence the show actually provides, the more the official answer starts to crack. Start with the contest. Fox invited viewers across America to submit guesses. The prize was enormous by the standards of the time. And according to the DVD commentary for the episodes, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of contest entries guessed the correct answer. Nobody. The person who was awarded the prize was chosen at random from the submission pool, and because they had not identified the right answer, they received a cash payment instead of the promised prize of being animated into the show. The writers acknowledged on the commentary that they were aware of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer to a Simpsons newsgroup on the night of the original broadcast. But this person was using a college internet account. By the time the contest concluded and the producers attempted to locate them, the account no longer existed. The one person who got it right had vanished. Think carefully about what this means. The show's creators designed a mystery they told the public was solvable from the clues embedded in Part 1. They ran a national contest around it. They promoted it as a puzzle that a viewer paying close enough attention could crack. And when the answer was revealed, the result was that essentially nobody, out of thousands of entries, had worked it out correctly. Either the clues were insufficient, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not actually follow logically from the evidence the way the show had implied it would. Now examine the clues themselves. Burns falls on the sundial and his hands come to rest on W and S, which from his perspective reads M and S. The show uses this to mean Maggie Simpson. Case closed. But Burns himself stated, clearly and on the record within the episode, that the positioning of his hands on those letters was not intentional. He did not arrange himself on the sundial to point at his attacker. He simply fell. The single most prominent piece of physical evidence in the entire mystery, the clue the show uses to anchor the Maggie answer, was explicitly described by the victim himself as a coincidence. The central piece of evidence is, by the show's own acknowledgement, meaningless. Then there is the question of the gun. Burns was carrying a firearm in a holster. At some point before the shooting, the holster is shown empty. The gun was already missing from Burns's person before the attack occurred. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, which they had obtained from him at some prior moment in the evening. This narrows the suspect pool considerably. The shooter was someone who came to the town meeting without their own weapon, who encountered Burns and somehow obtained his gun, and who used it impulsively or opportunistically. A baby finding a dropped gun on the ground fits this profile. But so does almost any other character at the gathering who was not already carrying a weapon that night. And then there are Burns's last words before the shot was fired. "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised. He was not frightened. He said those words with the particular quality of mild recognition, the way you might acknowledge someone whose face you know but whose presence you were not expecting. Had Burns ever had a meaningful interaction with Maggie Simpson prior to this episode? The show had never established any real relationship between them. Burns barely recognizes Homer, the man who has worked for him for years. The notion that Burns would see a 1-year-old baby and say, calmly and with apparent familiarity, "Oh, it's you," does not sit comfortably with everything we know about Burns's general awareness of the people around him. There is a season 18 moment that most viewers have filed away as a throwaway and then forgotten. Homer casually mentions, on camera, with no apparent dramatic weight attached to the statement, that he was actually the one who shot Burns. He says it. Nobody reacts. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. Homer Simpson confesses, in the presence of witnesses, to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield, and the show treats it like background noise. There are two explanations for this. Either Homer is lying or exaggerating for attention, which is entirely consistent with his character, Or the original verdict was wrong and Homer knows it because he was the one who pulled the trigger. One of the most carefully argued alternative theories builds a case for Marge as the real shooter. The argument is this: Marge is Marge who watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, and steal the sun from her town. She is also a woman who, in an earlier episode, Burns had become genuinely infatuated with. He fell for Marge. And the theorist argues that this infatuation explains the one thing about the official answer that is most difficult to account for: why Burns did not identify the real shooter when he woke up. If Burns shot by Marge, the woman he had been in love with, his response to waking up in a hospital bed would be to protect her. He would not name her. He would look around the room and find the answer least likely to result in prosecution. He would choose whoever was most convenient, most legally untouchable. A baby cannot be prosecuted. Chief Wiggum says it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect answer. Too young to deny the accusation. Too young to understand what she was being accused of. Too young to ever face any consequence for it. If someone with knowledge of the investigation and influence over Burns wanted to protect the real shooter, blaming Maggie was the cleanest, most airtight solution possible. The show itself, in a moment that is either confirmation or one of the cleverest pieces of misdirection ever attempted in television, shows you something in the final moments of Part 2. After the case has been declared closed and everyone has left Burns's hospital room, Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, deliberately, ensuring that nobody is watching, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the act of firing a gun. The show frames this as confirmation. She did it. She knows what she did. But there is another reading available, and it is just as consistent with the footage. A baby, watching the adults around her conduct themselves in particular ways, imitates what she has seen. Babies do this. It is one of the primary mechanisms through which human children learn. Maggie watched someone shoot Burns. She observed the motion. She remembers it, in the impressionistic, visceral way that very young children remember things. She is not confessing in that final shot. She is remembering. She is replaying a moment that was traumatic and strange and too large for her to process in any other way. The alternate endings prove that even the show's own writers were not fully committed to the Maggie answer. A complete alternative conclusion was animated, in which Smithers is revealed as the true shooter. Fully written, fully voiced, fully produced. This ending was aired during the Simpsons' 138th episode spectacular, presented by Troy McClure, who dismisses it by saying it would not have made sense because all the Simpson DNA evidence would have to be ignored. McClure calls this downright nutty, and the episode acknowledges, in this same breath, that ignoring DNA evidence to reach a desired verdict is something that happens, a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial that was dominating American cultural attention at the exact moment these episodes were produced. The show is winking at you. It is acknowledging that the official answer is not necessarily the right answer. It is reminding you that evidence can be read in whatever direction those with the power to shape the narrative want it to be read. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this seriously enough to develop it before abandoning it. The answer was not predetermined by the clues embedded in Part 1. The clues were adjusted and arranged to fit whatever answer the writers eventually settled on. The mystery was constructed backward. And there is a question that nobody seems to ask in all the years of analysis and debate. In a town where every single resident had a genuine motive, where dozens of people were carrying weapons to the very meeting where the shooting occurred, where the victim had just committed an act of ecological terrorism against the entire community by stealing their sunlight, how is it possible that only one person acted? Springfield is not known for restraint. These are people who riot over minor provocations. They form mobs over misunderstandings. They have burned down buildings over disputes that were resolved within the same episode. But when Burns blocks out the sun and threatens the literal survival of every living organism in the town, only one person fires a shot? Either Springfield is far more docile than it has ever appeared to be, or the shooting was not the spontaneous, accidental event the official account describes. Maybe it was planned. Maybe someone with knowledge of Burns's schedule, access to his firearm, and sufficient motivation arranged for something to happen in that parking lot. Someone like Smithers, freshly fired and shattered. Someone like Homer, who had finally broken under the weight of years of being treated as invisible. Someone like Marge, who had watched her family dismantled piece by one man's greed. Or someone whose name we have never thought to consider because the investigation was never designed to reach it. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The show has committed to it. The writers stand behind it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled law. But the contest that nobody won, the sundial clue that Burns himself called accidental, the alternate endings that were fully produced, Homer's unexamined confession, and the final image of Maggie alone in a room reenacting something she witnessed, all of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never actually resolved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are two very different things. Section 4. How Mr. Burns is still alive. You do not need to understand every word tonight. Let the story wash over you. Just follow the shape of it, the way you would follow a river in the dark, by the sound it makes and the direction it seems to want to go. And the direction tonight leads inevitably to one man, to a window somewhere high above Springfield, to a figure looking down at the town below him with eyes that have been watching for a very long time. Charles Montgomery Burns is a medical impossibility. The show has never directly resolved his age, because every time it provides a specific date or reference, it seems to immediately contradict it somewhere else. But across dozens of episodes, scattered through more than 3 decades of storytelling, the accumulated picture is consistent. Burns was born somewhere in the late 1800s. He has described personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has referenced working relationships with historical figures who died decades before most of the show's audience were born. He has described attending Yale in what sounds very much like a different era entirely. He served in World War II, in a capacity the show depicts as morally complicated at best. He has spoken about the Gilded Age not as a period of history, but as something he personally experienced. By the most conservative reading of the show's timeline, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the more liberal interpretations of the various contradictory dates the show has floated, he may be closer to 140. And he does not merely exist at that age. He functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He navigates modern finance and modern law. He orchestrates long-term schemes that require sophisticated planning, precise execution, and an intimate understanding of how contemporary institutions work. His physical body is genuinely frail, yes. His grip strength is negligible. A hummingbird in one memorable scene is able to knock him flat, but his mind is razor-sharp. His strategic intelligence is arguably unmatched anywhere in Springfield. Mr. Burns is the most capable cognitive entity in the show's universe, operating at the highest level of functional intelligence for longer than any human being should theoretically be capable of sustained consciousness. The show addresses his survival mechanism directly in the Springfield Files. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so extreme, so saturated with experimental compounds and radiation therapy, that it causes his entire body to emit visible green light afterward. A healthy green glow is how the show describes it. The treatments keep him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without another dose, he will die. Miss one appointment and the margin for error reaches 0. Burns's continued existence is not a function of natural biology. It is a function of scheduled maintenance, the way you would service a machine that would stop running without regular intervention. The treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive contamination into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled, calibrated radiation exposure to sustain his own biological functions. Burns is not simply profiting from nuclear power. He is, in the most literal possible sense, powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by decades of proximity to radioactive material, and likely by deliberate therapeutic exposure going back further than anyone would want to trace, that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. Remove the radiation and his system will fail within a week. This explains something the show has depicted many times without ever analyzing. In one of the most famous scenes in the entire series, Burns visits a doctor for a routine examination. The doctor reviews his results and delivers the news with the particular careful manner of a physician who is genuinely uncertain how to frame what he is about to say. Burns, the doctor explains, has every known disease. Every single illness that medical science has cataloged. Every one of them is present in his body simultaneously. But they exist in a state of perfect equilibrium. Each disease cancels out every other disease. Every illness is trying to kill him. And because they are all present at once, they create a biological gridlock in which no single condition can advance far enough to become fatal. The doctor calls this Three Stooges syndrome, comparing it to the classic comedy scenario of three people trying to pass through a doorway at the same moment. None of them can get through because they are all blocking each other simultaneously. The scene is played for enormous, affectionate laughs, and it works brilliantly as comedy. But if you accept the radiation framework, it makes a terrifying kind of sense. Burns's body is not maintaining this equilibrium through any natural process. The weekly radiation treatments are doing it. They do not cure his diseases. Nothing could. What they do is maintain the precise chemical and biological balance that keeps every illness in stasis, every condition suspended at the exact point where it cannot progress further without something else progressing first. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear management. Burns's body is essentially a biological reactor, and his weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods to prevent a meltdown, which means Smithers's role in Burns's life is not merely administrative, it is existential. Smithers manages Burns's schedule with an obsessive precision that the show plays as devotion, but which operates, at its functional core, as a medical necessity. Smithers ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment. Smithers monitors Burns's physical condition with a vigilance that goes beyond anything a normal assistant would consider part of the job description. The show has established repeatedly that if Smithers were ever to leave, if he were ever removed from his position or simply chose to walk away, Burns would be helpless in a way that goes beyond emotional dependency. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns would miss a dose. The disease equilibrium would collapse, every illness would surge forward simultaneously, and Burns would be dead within days. Smithers is not devoted to Burns out of love alone, though the show makes clear that his feelings are genuine and complicated. He is devoted in part because he understands at some level that his continued presence is the difference between Burns living and dying. His devotion is functionally a medical intervention, and that knowledge, that quiet awareness of his own indispensability, is the invisible foundation of their entire relationship. Burns's engagement with historical events adds another layer to the immortality question. The show has depicted him referencing or directly interacting with an extraordinary number of historical moments spanning more than a century. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale in an era that the details suggest was considerably earlier than any living person's educational experience. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during World War II and kept it hidden for decades without anyone catching up with him. He has referenced the Gilded Age with the familiar fondness of someone who was present for it, who experienced its particular pleasures and excesses firsthand. His family wealth, the show has made clear, predates not only Burns himself but the Industrial Revolution. The Burns family is depicted as one of the oldest and most continuously powerful dynasties in American history. They did not simply accumulate wealth. They built the infrastructure through which wealth flows and then charged everyone else for access to it. Generation after generation of the Burns family maintained and extended this power in ways that suggest either extraordinary luck spanning centuries or methods of succession that go beyond ordinary inheritance. The show never directly addresses what previous Burns patriarchs may have done to ensure their grip on power persisted. But the current Burns's methods, the radiation treatments, the medical infrastructure, the army of personal physicians, invite the question of whether there were earlier methods, different methods, serving the same ultimate function across different eras. Burns has come closer to dying than almost any other character on the show, and he has survived every approach to the end through the same mechanism: money. Not cartoon resilience, not luck, not the show's need to keep its villain alive for narrative purposes. Burns survives because he has spent more than a century building an apparatus specifically designed to ensure his survival, regardless of what happens to his physical body. Every dollar spent, every institution quietly corrupted, every politician discreetly purchased, every doctor retained on permanent standby. It all serves one purpose: keep Burns alive, keep the treatments administered, keep the disease equilibrium holding, keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, his empire dies with him. And his empire, as he has structured it, does not allow him to die. There is a dimension to this that is more unsettling than any individual detail. Springfield needs Burns, not in the way that exploited workers need their exploiters, where need is really just dependency manufactured through the destruction of alternatives. Springfield needs Burns in a more fundamental sense. The town's economy runs on the power plant. The power plant cannot function without Burns's involvement because only Burns maintains the relationships with the doctors, the pharmaceutical suppliers, the private researchers who keep the plant operational in its current state of productive dysfunction. Remove Burns and the plant faces either shutdown or genuine regulatory scrutiny, either of which would destabilize everything built around it. So, the town is locked into a closed loop. Burns needs the treatments to stay alive. The treatments require the infrastructure of wealth to be administered. The wealth requires the plant to keep operating. The plant requires Homer's incompetent complicity to avoid genuine oversight. Homer's complicity is guaranteed by the deal Burns struck with Grandpa Simpson decades ago, and Grandpa's silence was purchased with the promise of Homer's permanent employment. Everything connects. Every piece of it feeds every other piece. The man, the machine, the money, the family, the town, all of them sustaining each other in an arrangement so self-reinforcing that there is no obvious lever anyone could pull to make it stop. Burns is not immortal. The show is careful not to claim that. He is something more precise than immortal. He is too expensive to die, too embedded in the systems that depend on his survival to be allowed to fail, too old and too wealthy and too thoroughly networked into every institution that might otherwise hold him accountable to face any consequence for what he has done and continues to do. Springfield will keep paying his medical bills, will keep tolerating the cracked cooling towers and the radioactive water and the luminous rats and the inexplicable skeletons in the basement, because Burns keeps the lights on, and the people of Springfield, their critical thinking worn down by decades of contamination and engineered dependency, are no longer capable of imagining a version of their town that does not need him at the center of it. He will be there forever, or at least until the treatment schedule slips. And Smithers, as of the last episode, is still very much on the job. Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper, Springfield's Collective Denial. There is something almost meditative about thinking through The Simpsons at this hour, at this quiet point in the night. The way the show just keeps going. The way it absorbs every contradiction and every catastrophe and every revelation and then, by the following week, simply proceeds as if none of it happened. There is a rhythm to it that is almost musical. Crisis, resolution, reset. Over and over, endlessly, for 36 years. Most people who have discussed this phenomenon call it episodic storytelling. They treat it as a production convention, a necessary feature of a show that was designed to run forever without the burden of serialized continuity. Each episode ends with the status quo restored because the next episode needs to begin with the status quo intact. But there is one episode, a deeply controversial episode that was nearly universally despised when it aired and has been cited ever since as the moment The Simpsons definitively lost its way, that offers a different explanation. An explanation that is more uncomfortable precisely because it is not a critique of the show's writing at all. It is, if you approach it correctly, the show's most honest moment. Its most revealing look behind the curtain. Not at the animation process or the writing room, but at the town itself. At what Springfield fundamentally is and how it functions. The episode is The Principal and the Pauper. Season 9, Episode 2. It aired on September 28, 1997, and 28 years later it is still cited as the point of no return. The episode where The Simpsons stopped honoring its own continuity and betrayed the trust of its audience. Fans hated it. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Burns, publicly stated his displeasure. Critics lined up to describe it as a catastrophic creative error. But here is what almost no one wants to acknowledge about The Principal and the Pauper. The episode is not poorly written. It is not lazy. It is ruthlessly honest about what Springfield is. It simply has the audacity to show you that truth directly rather than allowing you to absorb it at a comfortable remove, episode by episode, catastrophe by forgotten catastrophe. The premise. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger walks in, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was believed dead after being captured as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia. He survived. He escaped. He came home to Springfield to reclaim his life. And he found it occupied. The man Springfield has known and respected and argued with and ignored for 2 decades as Principal Seymour Skinner is revealed to be an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a young man from the wrong end of whatever hope Springfield once offered, with no prospects, no community, no identity worth keeping. He was drafted. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian felt guilty enough to travel to Springfield and deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never belonged anywhere, who had no life of his own worth returning to, went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the history, the mother, the community, the identity. He lived inside it for 20 years. He built a career and relationships and a very specific set of authority dynamics around a self he had borrowed from a dead man, or a man everyone believed was dead, until the real Skinner walked through the door. The truth is now fully exposed. Everyone in Springfield knows that their principal is a fraud, that the man who has been shaping their children's educational experiences, maintaining an extraordinarily complicated relationship with his own mother, and serving as one of the town's central authority figures for 2 decades is not who he claimed to be. The question before the town is, what do we do with this information? Springfield holds a meeting. The real Skinner is present. Tamzarian is present. The community is presented with documented, undeniable proof of the deception, and the town votes. Not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on how to restore the real Skinner's identity and position. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They choose the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree that Armin Tamzarian is henceforth and permanently the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the man who survived a prisoner of war camp in Southeast Asia and came home to find his name and his mother and his entire existence stolen, is tied to a train and physically removed from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever mention any of this again. Let that arrangement settle for a moment. A community was presented with definitive proof that a major public figure was living under a false identity. They had the real person, the legitimate claimant standing right in front of them, and they chose the fake. Unanimously. With legal weight attached to the choice, they sentenced the truth to exile and criminalized memory. The audience hated this. The critical reception was fierce and has never really softened. The episode consistently appears on lists of the worst episodes in the show's history. The complaint is always some version of, how could the writers do this to Skinner? Everything we believed about him was built on a fiction. His military service, his relationship with Agnes, his dynamic with Bart, his entire personality, all of it is now revealed as constructed on a stolen foundation. The show destroyed its own character for a cheap narrative twist. But here is the thing. The character was not destroyed by the revelation. He was always constructed on that foundation. The revelation did not change what Skinner was. It changed what the audience knew about him. And the town's response to that revelation, the unanimous vote to keep the lie intact and exile the truth, is not a dramatic failure. It is a description of how Springfield has always operated. Springfield has always chosen comfortable fictions over uncomfortable truths. It has always agreed to forget whatever does not fit the narrative it prefers. The only difference with this episode is that for once, you get to watch the mechanism work in real time. You see the vote. You watch the legal decree. You observe the physical expulsion of inconvenient truth from the community. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets back to normal after something genuinely world-altering has occurred, it happens off-screen. You just notice, when the next episode begins, that the previous episode might as well not have happened. The Principal and the Pauper is the one time the show brought the camera into the room where the forgetting is decided. Consider the inventory of things Springfield has experienced and then simply moved past. The town has been physically destroyed and rebuilt. It has been invaded. It has been sealed under a federal government dome because it was classified as an environmental hazard. It has come within moments of nuclear meltdown on multiple occasions. It has been subject to alien encounters that were resolved in ways that, by the following episode, nobody seems to have retained any memory of. It has watched its richest and most powerful citizen be shot and nearly killed at a town meeting. It has survived floods, fires, and the literal blocking of the sun. And every single time by the next episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody references the dome. Nobody discusses the shooting. The flood damage is gone. The sun, which was physically blocked by a mechanical device for what the show suggests was days or weeks, is shining again and no one mentions it. The slate is wiped clean with a completeness that is almost ceremonially thorough. The Principal and the Pauper gives you the clearest picture of why this happens. Springfield resets not because the writers are being lazy, not because the show lacks commitment to continuity, but because the town collectively and deliberately chooses to reset. There is an unspoken social contract operating in Springfield, and the episode shows you a spoken, legalized version of it. The contract says, "We will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the lie as truth, and the truth as a threat. And anyone who insists on the truth too loudly will be removed from the community one way or another." This is not cartoon logic. This is a recognizable description of how real communities function under pressure. Small towns in particular have a well-documented and genuinely frightening capacity for collective amnesia when the truth is too costly. Scandals are absorbed and then buried. Crimes committed by people who are useful to the community's self-image are explained away or simply not discussed. Inconvenient facts get rewritten through the accumulated weight of repeated official denials until the rewritten version becomes the version everyone remembers, because it is the only one they were allowed to repeat out loud. Springfield does this to everything. The real Seymour Skinner was simply the instance where it happened with the paperwork visible. There is a layer available to this episode if the coma theory is sitting in the back of your mind while you watch it. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since 1993 is the product of an unconscious mind generating a world from memory and ambient stimulus, then this episode takes on a particularly devastating quality. Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario in which an entire community votes to sustain a lie, to legally protect a false identity, to exile anyone who insists on reality. Because Homer needs to believe that this is possible. He needs to believe that stolen identities can become real through collective agreement. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can replace the true one and that nobody will eventually come along and rip it away. Because what Homer has been living, in the hospital bed, for decades, is a fake life replacing a real one, a dream masquerading as reality. And as long as Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, as long as nobody in the Dreamtown questions the impossible arrangements they all live within, Homer does not have to face what it would mean to stop dreaming. The Principal and the Pauper is the most important episode of The Simpsons. Not the best, perhaps, but the most honest. It shows you the infrastructure. It shows you the machinery that makes every reset possible, every catastrophe forgettable, every impossible arrangement permanent. It is the one episode where the show looks directly at you and says, "This is how this works. This is what this town is. This is what we have all agreed to be part of." Armin Tamzarian is still calling himself Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still telling itself that everything is fine. The real Seymour Skinner is somewhere out there, still tied to his train car, still the last honest man in a town that decided honesty was a crime. And the paperwork making all of this legal is filed somewhere in the Springfield Hall of Records, collecting dust next to all the other documents nobody is allowed to read. Section 6, Maggie Simpson, the most dangerous person in Springfield. The room is quiet. Your breathing is slower now. This next part does not require your full attention. Let it come to you the way the best parts of sleep come, sideways, unexpectedly, without effort. We are going to talk about the baby. Maggie Simpson does not walk reliably. She does not speak beyond a handful of phonetic sounds and the occasional pacifier-based commentary. She communicates through gesture, through the direction of her enormous eyes, through a quality of focused, evaluating attention that most people in her vicinity are far too busy to notice. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in that time, without forming a single complete sentence, Maggie has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She organized and led a daycare rebellion against a caretaker who had constructed an authoritarian regime over other people's infants and was operating it with disturbing efficiency. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations through interventions that required planning, timing, and the kind of adaptive problem-solving that most adults struggle to access under pressure. She has been tested and found to possess intelligence that the available instruments are not capable of measuring in any meaningful way. She has consistently demonstrated cognitive abilities that should not exist in a child who cannot yet reliably navigate a staircase. And through all of it, she has said nothing. Every remarkable thing she has ever done, she has done in silence. Start with the shooting, because it is the act that defines Maggie in the public imagination, even though, as we have already established, the evidence for her guilt is considerably more complicated than the official verdict suggests. Whether or not Maggie intentionally fired that gun, the aftermath is what matters most for understanding who she is. A baby was identified as the person who shot the richest man in town. The investigation was conducted. The evidence was examined. And the conclusion was, yes, this infant committed an act of violence against a grown adult, and there is nothing to be done about it because no jury would ever convict someone who cannot yet ask for a glass of water. And the episode ends. The case is closed. Everyone goes home. Except, before the credits roll, Maggie does something. Everyone has left the hospital room. She is alone. She looks around carefully, deliberately, checking her surroundings in a way that is not reflexive and is not accidental. It is a scan. The kind of purposeful environmental assessment you perform when you want to confirm that nobody is watching before you do something you have decided to keep private. And once she has confirmed she is unobserved, she moves her pacifier in a motion that unmistakably mimics the act of pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as a confession. She did it. She knows she did it. Case closed, again with punctuation. But watch the sequence of behaviors rather than the gesture itself. Looking around to confirm privacy, waiting until the coast is clear, then and only then performing an action she has decided must not be witnessed. That is not how babies behave. That is not the behavioral repertoire of a child who does not yet understand object permanence. That is situational awareness. That is memory. That is impulse control. That is a deliberate choice to keep something private. Those are not developmental traits associated with infancy. They are traits associated with someone who understands what they are doing and has concluded that managing perception is, for now, the optimal strategy. The Longest Daycare is a short theatrical film released in 2012, screened in cinemas before Ice Age, Continental Drift. It was nominated for an Academy Award, and it is 7 minutes of Maggie Simpson demonstrating intelligence that would be remarkable in an adult, let alone in a child who has not yet learned to form words. The premise is simple. Maggie is left at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare facility run with authoritarian efficiency by a woman who appears to regard childhood as a resource to be managed, rather than a period of life to be supported. Inside the facility, Maggie encounters a caterpillar approaching the moment of becoming a butterfly. She decides to protect it. Another baby, a bully named Gerald with a distinctive unibrow, decides to destroy it. What follows is 7 minutes of Maggie outmaneuvering the bully, the daycare staff, and the facility's physical security systems through a combination of observation, planning, improvisation, and adaptive execution that most adults in genuine high-pressure situations would fail to demonstrate. She reads the environment. She identifies threats and neutralizes them sequentially. She develops strategies in real time and adjusts them when circumstances change. She executes multi-step plans that require spatial awareness, precise timing, and the ability to accurately model other people's behavior so she can predict and redirect it. She does all of this while physically limited to the motor skills of a 1-year-old. Her body cannot keep up with her mind. She falls. She crawls when she needs to run. She is working at a significant physical disadvantage against every other element in the environment. And she succeeds anyway, consistently, at every stage of the plan, because her cognitive capacity compensates for every constraint her physical development imposes. Her decision-making is, across the entire film, essentially flawless. Every choice she makes is the correct one given the information she has at the moment she makes it. She is operating at a level of intelligence that her body simply has no business housing. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence on several occasions throughout its run. The results shift slightly depending on the episode, because the show is not primarily interested in internal consistency on this point. But the pattern across all of these moments is the same. Maggie's intelligence, however it is measured in any given context, consistently exceeds what should be possible. It registers as extraordinary. It registers as outside the range of what standardized instruments were designed to capture. The family consistently fails to notice. This is perhaps the detail that matters most. Maggie operates in the background of the Simpson household, routinely demonstrating capabilities that should stop every other character in their tracks. and nobody pays enough sustained attention to register what they are seeing. Homer is managing his own disasters. Marge is managing Homer, managing his disasters. Bart is conducting whatever campaign of low-level social disruption is currently occupying him. Lisa is fighting her daily battle for recognition in a household and community that views her intelligence as a mild inconvenience. The household is constantly, comprehensively loud. And in the center of it, Maggie sits, watching, listening, processing everything that happens around her and filing it away with a thoroughness that nobody suspects because everybody is too busy with their own noise to look at the quiet baby in the corner. The theory that ties all of this together is this: Maggie's silence is not developmental delay. It is a strategic choice, made consciously, sustained deliberately, by a mind that is intelligent enough to have looked at the environment it inhabits and concluded that visibility is a liability. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family and in this town. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. Lisa is genuinely, measurably exceptional. Her intelligence exceeds that of every adult in her immediate vicinity and most of the adults in Springfield. She has spent her entire childhood attempting to use that intelligence in service of things that matter: truth, fairness, the well-being of the environment and the community she lives in. She advocates, she argues, she explains, she demonstrates, she produces evidence. The response she receives is isolation, mockery, dismissal, polite tolerance at best, and active hostility at worst. Lisa speaks up and is ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets pushed back. Lisa brings her intelligence to bear on problems that need solving and finds that the problems she is addressing are not problems that the people around her actually want solved, because solving them would require acknowledging things that are easier to leave unacknowledged. Lisa's intelligence is her most essential quality and her heaviest burden, because she wears it visibly. She announces herself as the person who sees most clearly, and Springfield's response to that announcement is consistent. It does not particularly want to be seen clearly. Maggie has watched this. From the very beginning, from whatever point her cognitive capacity began to develop, Maggie has been observing her sister's daily struggle. She has seen what it costs to be the most intelligent person in a room that does not value intelligence. She has seen what it costs to insist on truth in a town that has made truth optional. She has watched Lisa fight every day for recognition that never quite arrives, at a price in isolation and sadness that never seems to diminish. And Maggie has drawn a different conclusion. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less you appear to be, the more you are free to actually be. The less they see you, the more you can do. And this strategy works. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, what is the result? The family does not notice. The community does not notice. The investigation into Burns's shooting focused on everyone except the baby, because who, as Chief Wiggum himself says, suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to notice them organizing. Every heroic act Maggie has performed, every moment she has intervened to prevent something catastrophic, has happened in the spaces where nobody is paying attention. And Maggie has ensured that nobody pays attention to her by maintaining, with remarkable consistency and discipline, the most effective possible disguise. She pretends to be exactly what everyone expects a baby to be: quiet, passive, helpless, dependent. She is none of those things. She is, by almost any measurement the show offers, the most capable member of the Simpson family. She has simply decided, for now, that this is not information she wants to share. Connect this to the radiation theory and the picture becomes even more extraordinary. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations, and if those mutations affect each individual differently based on some combination of genetic factors and exposure patterns, then Maggie and Homer represent the extreme ends of a spectrum. Homer's mutation diminished his cognitive capacity to the point of clinical disability. Maggie's mutation amplified her cognitive capacity to levels that the show cannot adequately describe or measure. Same environment, same family, same contaminated water and irradiated air. But where the radiation took something away from the father, it added something extraordinary to the youngest daughter. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radiological event. He is what happens when mutation subtracts. She is what happens when mutation gives something back, and more. If the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a quality that is almost too sad to look at directly. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is the product of an unconscious mind desperately trying to maintain the simulation of the life it misses, then Maggie's extraordinary capabilities are a father's deepest hope projected onto the child he cannot see grow up. Homer cannot be there to watch Maggie develop. He cannot see her become the person she is becoming. He cannot be present for the stages and milestones and revelations that define a child's growth into themselves. So in the dream, he gives her what he cannot give her in reality. He gives her a mind that does not need him to protect it. He gives her the capacity to handle anything on her own, to navigate any situation, to solve any problem, to be safe and capable and more than enough for whatever the world puts in front of her. Her genius in the dream is a prayer from a father lying in the dark for the baby he cannot reach. But back in Springfield, assuming there is still a waking Springfield to return to, there is a darker reading. Maggie does not speak because speaking has never been rewarded in this town. She does not reveal her intelligence because intelligence is punished here. She watches everything and remembers everything and understands everything, and she waits. The show never tells us what she is waiting for. Maggie's endgame is the one truly unsolved mystery of the Simpson family, the one storyline the show has never resolved or even properly addressed. She is 1 year old. She cannot walk without falling. She cannot yet manage a sentence. And she is, without any meaningful competition, the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She simply has not yet decided what to do with that. And perhaps that is the most unsettling thing the show has ever quietly offered us. Not what Maggie has done, what Maggie is waiting to do. Behind the pacifier, behind the enormous evaluating eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate stillness, something is thinking. Something is watching the family and the town and the world with an intelligence that nobody suspects and nobody could contain. And when Maggie finally decides to act, when she finally breaks her silence and shows Springfield what she has been carrying behind that blank, patient stare, nobody will be ready for it. Because nobody in 36 years has ever thought to prepare for Maggie, that is exactly how she designed it. Section 7, The Simpsons Predictions. Coincidence, satire, or something else? Settle in. This section is a little different from the ones before it. Less like a ghost story and more like sitting with someone who has been paying very close attention to something for a very long time and noticing that the attention was not wasted. The phenomenon of Simpsons predictions has, in the 20 years since it became a major internet conversation, achieved a kind of cultural life of its own. The idea that a cartoon sitcom from 1989 has been accurately forecasting world events for over 3 decades has moved from niche fan theory to mainstream shorthand, to the point where whenever something strange or improbable happens in the real world, someone will post a clip from some corner of the show's 788 episodes, and the comment section will fill with variations of the same phrase. The Simpsons predicted this. Let us go through the most significant cases carefully, because they deserve care. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president of the United States. In that same episode, Lisa's predecessor in the Oval Office is identified as Donald Trump. Lisa, upon assuming office, inherits a catastrophic budget crisis that she explicitly attributes to the previous administration. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the presidential election of 2016. 16 years. The show depicted a Trump presidency as the kind of satirical gesture toward absurdist American political possibility that seemed, in the year 2000, safely fictional. And then, over the course of those 16 years, American political culture traveled the distance between that joke and that reality. The internet's response was immediate, global, and somewhat unhinged in its enthusiasm. Screenshots circulated. The Simpsons predicted Trump became a meme that transcended the show's existing fan base and entered mainstream cultural conversation. People who had not thought about The Simpsons since the 90s suddenly found themselves sharing clips and asking sincerely, how did they know? In 1995, an episode depicted what appears to be a wristwatch with a touchscreen display, a description that aligns fairly closely with smartwatch technology. In 1994, Homer goes to space as part of a NASA mission alongside Buzz Aldrin, decades before commercial spaceflight became a serious industry. In 1998, Homer scribbles a mathematical equation on a chalkboard that, when examined by a physicist named Simon Singh, appears to have predicted the mass of the Higgs boson particle to within a reasonable margin of error. The Higgs boson was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. In 1999, Homer proposes a theory about the shape of the universe, suggesting it might resemble a donut. Years later, cosmological research found radiation patterns in the cosmic microwave background that some researchers interpreted as consistent with a toroidal or donut-shaped universe. In a 1993 episode called Marge in Chains, a flu virus originating from Asia spreads to Springfield, causing mass panic, consumer behavior changes, shortages of specific goods, and a frantic institutional search for a cure. The episode aired 27 years before COVID-19. During the fictional outbreak, the town accidentally releases a swarm of killer bees. During the actual 2020 pandemic, Asian giant hornets, dubbed murder hornets by the media, appeared in the United States for the first time, and were briefly treated as another layer of a year that had already become surreal. In 1996, an episode called Homer Palooza included a joke in which the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra. In 2024, Cypress Hill actually performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years between the joke and the event. In a 1998 episode, the show depicted what appeared to be the Disney Corporation acquiring the Fox network, a piece of media consolidation satire that became a factual event in 2019 when Disney completed its acquisition of 21st Century Fox, including the very network that airs The Simpsons. The list continues. Video calling technology depicted years before video calls became ordinary. Autocorrect failures shown before autocorrect existed. Surveillance culture satirized before surveillance cameras became ubiquitous in daily public life. Smartwatch-adjacent technology, driverless vehicle-adjacent technology, biometric data concerns that now feel like they belong on the front page of any newspaper on any given day. So, how? Al Jean, who has been an executive producer on the show since its earliest seasons, has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly and with a briskness that suggests he has been asked about it rather more often than he finds interesting. His explanation is this: if you throw enough darts, you are going to get some bullseyes. That is it. That is the full explanation. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, observations, satirical extrapolations, and cultural references. When you generate that volume of content over that length of time, some percentage of it is going to align with future events through the ordinary operation of statistical probability. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most celebrated seasons, puts it in even more grounded terms. He has said there are very few cases where The Simpsons actually predicted something. It is mainly coincidence, compounded by the fact that the episodes are old enough that history tends to repeat the kinds of situations they were satirizing. What looks like prediction is often pattern recognition. The same types of things keep happening because certain dynamics are structural features of the society being satirized, rather than one-time events. Fact-checking organizations have methodically examined many of the most famous prediction claims and found them to be considerably less extraordinary than they appear. The Trump prediction did not emerge from nothing. Trump had been publicly flirting with the idea of running for president since the late 1980s. His political ambitions were a known quantity years before the Bart to the Future episode was written. The writers were not predicting. They were extrapolating from available evidence to the absurdist but logical extreme, which is exactly what good satirists do. The Disney-Fox prediction followed the same pattern. Media consolidation was an accelerating trend by the late 90s. The idea that a major entertainment conglomerate might eventually swallow its competitors was not a prophetic insight. It was an observation about the direction of an industry pushed a few steps further than the current moment. The Simpsons writing room has historically been one of the most academically credentialed in the history of television. Multiple writers hold degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other institutions with strong programs in mathematics, science, and political theory. These are not people generating content at random. They are highly educated observers of American culture, operating in a genre that rewards careful trend analysis and the willingness to follow those trends to their unexpected but defensible conclusions. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do and then extrapolating. But here is where the story becomes genuinely strange, because the debunking handles most cases elegantly and then runs into a few that it handles less well. Some of the coincidences are so specific, so precisely detailed, that statistical probability starts to feel like an insufficient explanation. The Trump prediction did not merely forecast that a celebrity might run for president someday. It specified Trump by name. And there is an episode in which Trump descends an escalator in a sequence that mirrors, in ways that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence, the announcement he made in 2015 when he declared his candidacy. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not merely joke about exotic animals being dangerous. It depicted a specific performer being attacked by a specific white tiger in a specific type of performance context. And that is more or less exactly what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's tigers. These are not vague trend extrapolations. These are specific visual and situational details that align with subsequent events in ways that, even when you know exactly how the trick works, still make you stop and look again. And this is where the most interesting theory arrives. The one that is neither the supernatural claim that the writers can see the future nor the debunking claim that it is all coincidence and confirmation bias, though confirmation bias is absolutely real and absolutely part of the story. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through magic or prophecy but through cultural weight. The Simpsons is one of the most widely watched, most frequently quoted, most thoroughly embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current viewers have been alive. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture. Its jokes have entered the language in ways that are now invisible, because the references are so familiar they no longer read as references. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke does not disappear. It enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people absorb it, and it becomes part of the ambient imaginative background against which subsequent events are experienced. The joke does not predict the future. The joke makes the future familiar before it arrives. It primes the cultural imagination. It makes certain outcomes feel less shocking and more like an inevitable punchline. And when the punchline arrives, when reality catches up to the satire, it does not feel like prophecy. It feels like recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already did this. And because the show did it first, because it framed the event as something absurd enough to belong in a cartoon, the actual event arrives wrapped in that framing. Trump descending the escalator in 2015 echoes the cartoon escalator scene in a way that makes reality feel like it is imitating art. Because for millions of Americans, the cartoon version was the first version they encountered. Springfield does not reflect America. America has been becoming Springfield. The show held a mirror up for 36 years, and we stared into it long enough and hard enough that we started to resemble what we saw. The corrupt billionaire, the incompetent safety apparatus, the population too distracted by immediate pleasures to attend to the structural systems slowly degrading around them. The collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to recur because confronting them would require confronting their causes, and confronting their causes would require changing things that are profitable to leave unchanged. Springfield was not a prediction of where America was going. It was a description of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first, in yellow with 4 fingers and a laugh track. The predictions that failed are the other part of the story, the part that never makes it into the viral posts. The Simpsons has also depicted jetpacks, moon colonies, food replicators, political outcomes that went the other way, technological shifts that never materialized, and cultural trends that peaked and reversed before the show's satirical version of them became remotely prophetic. Nobody takes screenshots of those. Nobody builds conspiracy theories around the predictions that turned out to be wrong. Confirmation bias operates in one direction only. We remember the bullseyes and forget the dartboard full of misses. When you generate 788 episodes worth of satirical content about the trajectory of American culture and then filter that content through the internet's confirmation bias engine, the result looks like prophecy. It is not prophecy. It is the natural, intelligible outcome of a brilliantly staffed show running for an impossibly long time and then having its output curated by the most powerful selection mechanism ever constructed for separating memorable hits from forgettable misses. But knowing all of that, knowing exactly how the illusion is constructed, watching it still works. Next time a headline appears that sounds like it could have been an episode description, next time someone posts a clip from 1997 that lines up a little too neatly with something that just happened, even knowing the trick, knowing the statistics, knowing the confirmation bias operating underneath all of it, there is still a part of the mind that pauses, that sits with it, Because 800 episodes, 36 years, and enough bullseyes to make even the show's own creators pause sometimes and wonder whether they know something they should not. Section 8, Mona Simpson and the Burns Conspiracy. You are doing well. The night is long and unhurried, and there is no particular place we need to be by morning. Let this next piece come slowly, because it is a long story, and the best long stories reveal themselves layer by layer rather than all at once. This is the story of Homer Simpson's mother, and it is the story that explains, more completely than any other single thread in the show's entire run, why Homer Simpson is the way he is. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official account. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had told him his mother passed away when Homer was young. There was a grave. Homer had mourned in the way that Homer mourns things, imperfectly, without the vocabulary or the emotional architecture to fully process what he was carrying. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had died. He grew up believing that the fundamental grief of his childhood was simply his lot, simply what his life contained, simply something to be gotten through. That belief shaped everything about Homer in ways that the show spent 6 seasons building before it was ready to explain them. His desperate, sometimes overwhelming need for approval, his clinginess toward Marge, the fear underneath his love, the terror that she might eventually decide she has made a mistake. His compulsive need to be liked by everyone around him, even people who treat him poorly, even people who have given him no reason to trust them. His willingness to absorb humiliation and dismissal and outright contempt from Burns, rather than risk losing the stability of his job, which is the stability of his family, which is the stability of the only love he has been certain of since he was small. Homer Simpson's entire emotional architecture is a coping mechanism for a loss he did not have the right information to grieve correctly. In Season 7, the show changed everything. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired on November 19th, 1995, and it is widely considered one of the finest episodes in the history of the series. The setup involves Homer faking his own death to avoid working on a Saturday. He pushes a dummy off a cliff, the town believes he is dead, and when Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records to correct the official record, Homer finds something in the files that stops him completely. According to the municipal records of Springfield, his mother is alive. She has always been alive. The grave Abe showed him, the evidence of her death that Homer accepted without question because he was a child and because it was presented as the simple truth, was not her grave at all. It belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been pointing his son at a famous writer's headstone and calling it his wife's burial site for Homer's entire life. Homer finds Mona at the cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She does not recognize him at first. He has changed completely from the small boy she left behind. When he proves who he is, what follows is one of the most genuinely moving scenes the show has ever produced. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them, in a town neither of them has been able to live in safely. And then Mona tells him the truth. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she had to leave, because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger, because the man whose name Homer would grow up to see on his paychecks had destroyed her life and forced her to disappear. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was, by her own description, ordinary, married, a young son, living quietly in Springfield while the world outside was convulsing through the civil rights movement and the counterculture and the organized opposition to Vietnam. And then something changed. The show depicts this with its characteristic mix of comedy and genuine weight. Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists, people the show calls hippies but whose cause, the show is careful to establish, was entirely legitimate. They targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Let the full dimension of that settle before moving on. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations and radioactive waste on children's playgrounds. Burns owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory manufacturing weaponized biological agents. In Springfield, the same town where children were attending school and families were going to the grocery store and people were living their ordinary lives within whatever distance separated their kitchen windows from a building where someone was. Engineering diseases for deployment. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological material stored inside. During the raid, They accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was successful. The material was destroyed. The biological weapon was neutralized. And then Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped. Someone had been knocked down in the chaos. She stopped to help them. The instinct of a decent person encountering someone who has fallen, regardless of who that person is or what the circumstances are. The person she stopped to help was Mr. Burns. He saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI, and from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact Abe or explain to him what had happened or tell him what to say to their son. She could not hold Homer or tell him she loved him or be present for any of the moments that would define his childhood. She kissed him goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the night. And Homer woke up to find her gone, and then was told she was dead, and lived inside that understanding for 27 years. Here is the shape of what Burns actually did. He did not just report Mona to the FBI. He pursued her, actively. With the resources available to him as one of the wealthiest individuals in the state, he maintained a personal interest in ensuring she could never come home. When Mona returns to Springfield in Season 7, and the two of them are finally, briefly, improbably reunited, Burns recognizes her almost immediately. He spots her through a cab window. He calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, with the full knowledge of why she is leaving, knowing whose face is behind it. And he knows whose face is behind it. He knows that the man responsible for his mother's exile, the man who has been pursuing her for 27 years, is his own employer, Burns. The man who signs Homer's checks. The man Homer goes to work for every single morning. The man whose name Homer has been struggling to get Burns to remember for years. The man who owns the plant, owns the safety violations, owns the radioactive water, owns everything in Homer's adult working life that is grinding him down. Homer knows. He knows in that moment, and he does not connect the dots. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not appear to fully process the relationship between the billionaire who keeps his family fed and the billionaire who took his mother away. This is not played as stupidity, not exactly. It is played as something worse. It is played as the specific kind of cognitive limitation that comes from a life spent being damaged in small, persistent, cumulative ways. The crayon in Homer's brain, the radiation in the water, the compounded effect of decades of living in Springfield without the resources to understand what Springfield has been doing to him. Homer cannot make that connection, not because the connection is difficult to see, but because the parts of his mind that would allow him to follow cause and effect across that kind of span, to hold multiple truths in relation to each other and draw the obvious conclusion, those parts have been worn away. By the environment, by the employment, by the absence of the mother who would have, if she had been allowed to stay, raised a different Homer, a Homer with the full cognitive equipment to understand his own life. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life, he engineered Homer's. By forcing Mona away when Homer was a child, he ensured that Homer would grow up with a specific emotional wound that would make him, as an adult, precisely the kind of employee Burns needed. Desperate for approval, grateful for any stability, incapable of leaving, incapable of fighting back, too broken by the early loss and too cognitively compromised by the environment to understand the architecture of his own suffering. The show later reveals that Burns and Abe Simpson struck a private deal at some point after Mona's disappearance. Burns had committed a crime and Abe knew about it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer permanent employment at the plant. Regardless of how many mistakes Homer made, regardless of how many documented errors, regardless of any rational assessment of whether Homer was capable of performing the job he was assigned, 742 documented errors, the show has suggested at various points, and Homer was never let go for good because the deal protected him. Homer's improbable job security, which the show has always treated as a comic absurdity, is not a cartoon convenience. It is a contractual arrangement between Homer's father and the man who destroyed his family. And Homer has never been told, because telling him would require explaining everything else: the biological weapons lab, the activism, the FBI, the 27 years, the deal. All of it would have to come out. And Burns could not afford for all of it to come out, so it stayed buried. And Homer went to work every morning, and the deal held, and everyone played their part. 3 generations of Simpsons, broken by one man's grudge and one family's complicity, and one town's willingness to let the powerful do whatever they wanted as long as the lights stayed on. Mona eventually died. A later season addressed her passing with a quietness that the show rarely achieves when it is trying. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew leave for the last time. And this time there is no confusion about where she is going. No show. No joke waiting at the end to restore the temperature to something comfortable. Just a man and his mother and the weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them in a hospital room in a town that took everything from her. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has been a comedy for 36 seasons. But underneath all of it, underneath the falls and the recoveries and the strangling and the reset button, there is a family that was systematically disassembled by one man's determination to protect his interests and one community's determination to look the other way. Mona fought and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the enemy and buried the truth. Homer inherited the damage and never understood its origin. Burns won. He usually does. Because in Springfield, the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will report to work at the nuclear power plant every morning until he dies, because his grandfather made a deal in the dark and his mother kissed him goodbye while he was sleeping, and the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G, and Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. The system made sure of that long before Homer was old enough to choose anything for himself. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The night is very quiet now. The kind of quiet where you can almost hear your own thoughts if you let them slow down enough. Take a moment with that. Let the questions get soft before we ask the next one. Because this next question is one that has no answer, and it turns out that the absence of the answer is the most interesting part. Where is Springfield? Not which state is it in, though that question has occupied many people for many years. The deeper question, the one worth sitting with, is why the show has spent 36 years making it literally impossible to answer. The effort that has gone into maintaining Springfield's geographic ambiguity is not the absence of a decision. It is a sustained creative commitment to a particular kind of impossibility. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can name it and identify it by its landmarks than can name the capital of half the actual states in the country. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire, a gorge that has swallowed numerous objects, vehicles, and people over the years, a harbor, despite being a landlocked community in some episodes, a monorail that lasted approximately one episode, an elementary school, a prison, 2 hospitals, a quick E-Mart. It has mountains visible on clear days and ocean access in some episodes, and desert terrain in others, and farmland on its outskirts and dense forest nearby, and an active volcano referenced in at least one memorable context. It borders Ohio. It also borders Nevada. In other episodes, it has been placed near Maine and Kentucky. It is on the coast and also in the heartland. It is near the Canadian border. It is also somehow near Mexico. Its weather ranges from full winter blizzard conditions to tropical heat waves within the span of a single season. Springfield does not exist in any state. Springfield exists in all of them simultaneously. The show has been deliberately contradicting itself about its location for its entire run. Every time a detail appears that seems to narrow the geographic possibilities, another detail appears in a different episode that makes that narrowing impossible. In one episode, Springfield is definitively northern. In another, it is definitively southern. Lisa's area code begins with 636, which is a Missouri prefix. The state abbreviation has appeared in at least one episode as NT, which is not a real state abbreviation in the United States or anywhere else. When Homer calls the state capital in one episode, the voice on the other end says the state name begins with a vowel, which eliminates some possibilities while keeping so many others viable that the clue is essentially decorative. Matt Groening, the show's creator, was asked directly about this in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He named Springfield, Oregon, as the inspiration for the show's setting. He said he chose the name Springfield because it is one of the most common city names in America, appearing in dozens of states, and because he grew up near Springfield, Oregon, and the name had a personal resonance for him. For approximately 48 hours after the interview was published, fans considered the question resolved. Springfield was in Oregon. The mystery was over. And then the show continued. Episodes aired after the interview that placed Springfield in geographic contexts completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not adjust their approach in response to Groening's revelation. They kept the ambiguity alive, because the ambiguity was always the point, not a mistake or an oversight, but a deliberate and carefully maintained creative choice that serves the show in ways that a fixed location would not. The surface explanation is the one the show's creators have offered when pressed. Springfield is everywhere. It is designed to feel like every American community simultaneously, to resonate with any viewer regardless of their zip code. The geographic impossibility is not a bug. It is the mechanism by which the show achieves universal relevance. This is true. Groening has confirmed it directly. The writers have confirmed it. The intentional design philosophy of Springfield is to be every town at once. But apply the theories we have been following throughout the night, and the geographic impossibility acquires additional dimensions. If the radiation theory is correct, if Springfield is a contaminated zone where the laws of biology have been warped by decades of nuclear exposure, why should geography be exempt from the warping? If the people of Springfield can have 4 fingers and yellow skin and survive injuries that should be fatal, if the fish can grow a 3rd eye and the dogs can develop the same physical anomalies as their owners, if biology in this town operates by rules unavailable to the outside world, why should the physical landscape be held to any stricter standard? Maybe Springfield has both mountains and oceans in reasonable proximity because the contamination affects more than biology. Maybe the radiation has warped the physical space around the town in ways that compress geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. Maybe Springfield does not appear on any consistent map because it exists in a state of geographic mutation, just as its residents exist in states of biological mutation. If the coma theory is correct, the geographic impossibility is even more simply explained. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise map of the United States in its memory. It has impressions, fragments, the mountain he saw from a car window on a family trip, the ocean he glimpsed in a movie, the desert from a postcard, the farmland from driving through somewhere he can no longer quite place. His unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever encountered or imagined, layered on top of each other without regard for geographic consistency, because dreams do not have geographic consistency. Dreams have emotional consistency. They are assembled from feeling and desire and memory and longing, not from topographic accuracy. Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America, and Homer's memory of America is scattered and incomplete and held together by the particular gravity of things he loved and lost rather than by anything as orderly as a map. If the collective denial theory from the principal and the pauper is correct, then Springfield's refusal to have a fixed location is the ultimate expression of the town's fundamental relationship with accountability. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring regulatory action against a nuclear power plant if the state it sits in keeps shifting. You cannot hold anyone responsible for contaminating a water supply if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is a legal shield, possibly the most effective one available. A town with no fixed location has no permanent regulatory authority, no consistent EPA jurisdiction, no state attorney general who is definitively responsible for pursuing whatever needs pursuing. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means someone shows up with a map and a mandate and starts asking questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the man who signs the checks and glows in the dark after his Thursday appointments. There is an episode called Behind the Laughter, the season 12 mockumentary about the Simpsons family presented in the style of a documentary about a real television show. In the original broadcast, the family is identified as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state. The answer literally depends on which version of the episode you are watching. When Springfield has a definitive answer, that answer is not definitive. It shifts. It contradicts itself, depending on context. The truth about Springfield's location changes based on who is telling it and when. Which is, now that you think about it, true of everything in Springfield. Every state in the Union has been proposed as Springfield's home at some point in 36 years of analysis. Every proposal has evidence supporting it, and contradicting evidence directly adjacent to the support. The show created this state of permanent geographic ambiguity, and has maintained it with a consistency that is, when you recognize it as intentional, genuinely impressive. The ambiguity has outlasted cast members, writing rooms, showrunners, cultural moments, and decades of audience attention directed specifically at resolving it. Springfield will never be located. Not because the show cannot decide where it is, because the show decided a long time ago that Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. And a town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down, investigated, or held accountable by anyone. It simply keeps existing, in whatever state it needs to be in for the current episode, floating above the map like something that refuses to land. Section 10. The floating timeline. Your breathing is very slow now. You do not need to follow every word. This last major piece is the one that holds everything else together, and it is the kind of thing that works better when you are not trying too hard to grasp it. Let it come. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted in December of 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8 then. She is 8 now. Homer and Marge were roughly in their mid-30s. They still are. Maggie was 1 year old. She still is. 36 years have passed in the actual world. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The characters exist in a permanent present tense, locked at the ages they occupied when the show began, living through decades of cultural and technological and political change without adding a single year to their lives. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. It means the show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. The year changes around them, the references change, the technology in the background changes, but the characters do not. They exist in a state of temporal suspension where everything in the surrounding culture evolves, and they remain frozen at the center of it. Most people accept this as a feature of the format, a structural choice made early in the show's development that became permanent simply because the show ran long enough that reversing it would require confronting all the accumulated implications at once. But the floating timeline, when you sit with it long enough, has created contradictions so massive and so structurally strange that they have started to crack the foundation of Springfield's reality in ways that cannot quite be ignored. The most visible problem is Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their personal history was rooted in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school during a specific cultural era. Their courtship was accompanied by era-appropriate music, fashion choices, cultural references. The whole story of who they were before they were parents was anchored to a period that made sense for two people who were in their mid-30s during the late 1980s. But as the floating timeline dragged the present continuously forward, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1980. They met in approximately 2005, which means their high school experience was defined not by Watergate and disco and the energy crisis, but by MySpace and early YouTube and a completely different set of cultural textures. The show has reflected this shift explicitly. In later flashback episodes, Homer and Marge's formative years have been relocated to the 90s, then to the 2000s, then to a version of the recent past that keeps being quietly revised to maintain the illusion that the characters are the age they currently appear to be. Their origin story has been told and retold across multiple versions. Each version places their youth in a different decade. They were hippies. Then they were grunge fans. Then they were something that looked like a version of the early 2000s. Their characters and their love for each other remain constant throughout all of these revisions. The era does not. This means Homer and Marge do not have a fixed past. Their personal history is a draft that keeps being rewritten. Their memories are not stable. Their origin is approximate, an arrangement of emotional truths surrounded by historically inconsistent details, adjusted whenever the current episode needs the backstory to align with the present moment rather than the previous moment the backstory was written to align with. Every theory we have followed throughout this night arrives at the floating timeline and finds it explaining the same thing through a different path. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen memory of an unconscious man. The world, the dreaming Homer preserves, is the world as he last truly experienced it. His children cannot grow older because his brain has no record of them growing older. His wife cannot age because the image of her is locked to the last clear photograph in his memory. Time stopped in Springfield in April of 1993 because Homer's experience of time stopped in April of 1993, and Springfield is Homer's dream. The radiation theory says the biological aging process has been disrupted at the cellular level by decades of radioactive contamination. The same mutations that gave Blinky a third eye and gave Homer the physical resilience of something that should not be alive have altered the fundamental cellular mechanisms through which time normally registers in a body. Springfield's residents do not age because their biology has been reorganized by the environment into something that does not obey the normal calendar of human decay. The principle and the pauper theory says nobody ages because Springfield has collectively agreed not to acknowledge the passage of time, the same way it collectively agreed not to acknowledge that its principal was an imposter and that its power plant was killing everyone within its radius. Time passing is an inconvenient truth. The same social machinery that exiles inconvenient truths, that makes collective denial into community policy, has been applied to time itself. Springfield is not ignoring the fact that 36 years have passed because it cannot perceive it. It is ignoring the fact because perceiving it would require confronting everything else that those 36 years contain. The Burns immortality theory says that at least one person in Springfield has successfully negotiated with death through the application of sufficient wealth and medical technology. If death can be deferred indefinitely, aging can be deferred indefinitely. Burns is the proof of concept. The town does not age because Burns has demonstrated, through his own continued existence, that biological time is negotiable for those with enough resources to negotiate it. All of these theories arrive at the same conclusion through different roads. Time does not work in Springfield. Not because it is a cartoon and cartoons do not obey calendars, but because something about this specific place, this specific collection of people and systems and histories and choices, has interrupted the normal flow of time for everyone inside it. The show has imagined its characters aging multiple times. The Season 6 episode, Lisa's Wedding, flashes forward to a future in which Lisa is 23 years old, engaged to be married, living a life that is a recognizable extension of everything the show has suggested she would become: intelligent, principled, lonely in the specific way that very perceptive people are often lonely, searching for something she cannot quite name in a world that does not quite know how to accommodate her. The episode is detailed and specific and emotionally rich, and it proves that the show can imagine its characters as adults. It can envision their futures. It can tell stories about who they would become if time were allowed to pass. But it chooses not to. The flash forward is a single episode, a hypothetical, a window that opens and then closes. Lisa returns to being 8 years old by the following week. Bart returns to 10. The glimpse of who they might be is sealed away, and the permanent present resumes as though the glimpse never happened. The show can imagine growth. It has demonstrated this. It refuses to allow it. And the refusal is not simply a production decision, not only an institutional choice made for commercial reasons. It is a statement about something larger than the show itself. Because the floating timeline is not just a narrative device. It is a thesis about America and what America needs its stories to do. The Simpsons is the American family. They have been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. The argument could be made, seriously and with evidence, that the Simpson household is the most recognizable family unit in American cultural history. More people have a relationship with Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa than have a relationship with almost any actual institution or public figure. And the American family, as The Simpsons has always portrayed it, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must always be middle-aged, exhausted, well-meaning, failing upward. Marge must always be patient, perceptive, holding everything together with a combination of love and suppressed frustration. Bart must always be rebellious and fundamentally good underneath the rebellion. Lisa must always be brilliant and isolated and hopeful. Maggie must always be watching. The structure must hold, because the moment the Simpson family ages, the moment Bart graduates and moves out and becomes someone's problematic adult brother, rather than an endearingly troublesome child, the moment Lisa leaves for a university that can actually accommodate her gifts, the moment Maggie finally speaks and the silence is broken and whatever she has been carrying is finally revealed, the moment Homer retires and the house on Evergreen Terrace is quiet and Marge is standing in the kitchen making coffee for 2 people instead of 4, the show stops being a comedy. It becomes an elegy. A story about time and what it does to the things you love. About children who were once small and parents who were once young, and the particular grief of noticing, one ordinary Tuesday, that both of those things are no longer true. America does not want that story. Not from this show, not from these characters. It wants the version where the kids are always young and the parents are always together, and the house always looks the same, and the couch is always there, and Homer is always stumbling through the door at 5:30 having survived another day at the plant that should not exist but does. The floating timeline is the show's thesis. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be, because they represent something we have decided we cannot afford to release. The messy, chaotic, dysfunctional, loving, infuriating, indestructible American family. The family that survives everything and recovers from everything and resets after every disaster because we, the audience, watching and loving and refusing to look away, have decided that is what the American family does. The loop is not their prison. It is ours. We built it and we maintain it and we tune in every week, or every time the shuffle lands on a familiar episode, to confirm that the walls are still standing and the family is still intact and the timeline is still floating just above the ground, suspended between the past we remember and the future we are not quite ready to allow. Because if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9, and Maggie says her second word and Homer finally retires, then the show ends. And the show ending means admitting that the version of America it represents, the optimistic, chaotic, endlessly resilient version of the middle-class American family, was always temporary, was always fragile, was always one birthday, one graduation, one final episode away from dissolving into something we would not recognize as the show we loved. We pressed pause in 1989. We have never pressed play. And here we are, 36 years later, watching the same family in the same house, waiting for something to change, knowing nothing will, because we will not let it. Because letting it means growing up. And maybe growing up, really and finally, is what we have been watching The Simpsons to avoid. Section 11: Hans Moleman and Ned Flanders. Two quiet tragedies. We are nearly at the end now. The light is the same as it was when we started. Or maybe it is a little different. The particular quality of light that exists in rooms where someone has been quietly awake for a long time. Two small stories to close with. Two characters who live at the edges of Springfield's attention and are, in their own ways, the clearest windows the show has ever offered into what this town actually is. The first is Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any amount of time, you know Hans Moleman. He is the tiny, nearly blind, deeply elderly appearing man who exists in the background of Springfield and whose primary function appears to be suffering. He gets struck by cars. He gets crushed by various objects. He gets buried alive. He gets eaten by animals. He gets struck by lightning. He gets incinerated. He stumbles into the path of disasters that any ordinary person would notice approaching and avoid. He is, by any reasonable estimate, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. The show has killed Hans Moleman dozens of times. Not in Treehouse of Horror episodes which operate outside the normal rules and in which death is broadly comedic and consequence-free by design. In regular episodes, in canonical episodes, in episodes that are treated as part of the show's ongoing continuity, Moleman dies and then he appears again in the next episode, or a few episodes later, or sometimes in the same episode in a different scene, completely intact, without any explanation of his return. No resurrection moment, no acknowledgement that he was dead. He simply shows up again, ready to be killed again, in an endless rotation of misfortune and renewal. Most fans accept this as a running gag, a background absurdity that is there to be appreciated and not examined. Moleman dies a lot. It is a joke. Move on. But Hans Moleman once, in an episode that was not playing it as a particularly significant revelation, stated his age. He is 31 years old. 31. Look at him. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s at minimum. He is bent. His eyesight is nearly gone. His voice carries the particular frailty of extreme old age. He walks with a shuffling slowness that suggests decades of accumulated physical wear. He is, by every visible measure, a man who has lived an extraordinarily long time and has been diminished by it. If he is telling the truth, if there is no reason within the show's logic to believe he is lying, something took a man in the beginning of his adult life and aged him catastrophically. Something altered his biology so thoroughly that he presents, physically, as someone 50 or 60 years older than he is. Something did this to Hans Moleman, and nobody in Springfield has found this worth examining. And the same something made him nearly indestructible. He is physically frail in every normal sense, but death does not stick to him. Whatever the environmental contamination of Springfield did to his biology, it did it in a way that aged him externally, while simultaneously creating in him a cellular resilience that prevents his deaths from being permanent. The radiation theory has an obvious answer for both of these things. The coma theory has an answer. Molman is a background process in Homer's dream, a minor character that Homer's deteriorating brain occasionally allows to lapse and then reconstructs because the dream requires a certain population density to feel real. He is not a person in this reading. He is a prop that the dreaming mind breaks and reassembles without registering that it has done so. The collective denial theory has its own answer. Springfield has agreed not to notice Molman's repeated deaths for the same reason it has agreed not to notice everything else that should alarm it. A man dying in public repeatedly and then reappearing is alarming. The town has decided it is not alarming. The social contract holds. The only explanation that does not have an answer for Hans Molman is the one that says The Simpsons is just a cartoon and none of this means anything. That explanation runs out of steam surprisingly quickly when you actually stay with these details long enough to count them. The second story is Ned Flanders. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He is patient, generous, devoutly religious, physically healthy, financially responsible, consistently kind to people who do not deserve his kindness, and a devoted father to 2 boys who are polite and well-behaved and do not strangle each other on the couch. He is, by any objective measure, a better person than Homer in nearly every way that can be assessed. And the show punishes him for it with a thoroughness and a consistency that, once you notice it, never quite stops being uncomfortable to watch. Ned's wife, Maud, was killed at a Springfield Speedway event when a t-shirt cannon misfired and the projectile struck her off the bleachers. The reason the cannon misfired in this direction was that Homer was dodging the t-shirts, so they continued toward Maud instead. Homer's reflexive selfishness, his entirely characteristic concern with his own comfort over the safety of anyone around him, directly and fatally affected the woman next door. And Ned forgave him. Because that is what Ned does. He forgives. He turns the other cheek. He absorbs every injury the universe offers him and responds with grace and the quiet steadiness of a faith he has been told will be rewarded. Fans noticed over time the cracks in the facade. When a hurricane demolishes Ned's house and the community attempts to rebuild it and produces something so structurally inadequate that it collapses immediately, Ned has a complete psychological breakdown. He screams at the town. He says things he has been accumulating for years. He reaches for the rage that lives underneath the patience and, briefly, lets it out. And then he is institutionalized. And the institutionalization reveals something about Ned Flanders that makes everything before it look different. Ned's niceness is not a natural character trait. It is the result of childhood behavioral modification. As a young child, Ned was violent and uncontrollable. His parents, beatniks who did not believe in discipline, brought him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through a therapeutic approach that the show depicts as significantly more intensive than anything that would be considered ethical today. Ned's kindness was built. His patience was installed. His grace under provocation is not a spiritual achievement. It is a programmed response, a set of behavioral constraints that were put in place around a feral child before he was old enough to consent to them by a system that could not imagine him choosing differently. Everything about Ned's life reads differently once you have that information. His patience with Homer is not saintly. It is pathological, in the most precise sense of the word. He cannot express anger because his brain was trained at a formative age to suppress it at all costs. His faith is not the spiritual conviction of someone who has encountered the divine and been changed by the encounter. It is a coping mechanism for a man who needs an external explanatory framework to make sense of why he keeps suffering despite doing everything the framework tells him will lead to something better. His forgiveness of Homer after Maud's death is not grace. It is the conditioned response of a person who was taught, before he could articulate what was happening to him, that anger is not available to him as a response to harm. And here is what makes this the saddest story the show tells, even if it tells it mostly by implication. God talks to Homer. This is an established fact within the show's canon. Homer has had multiple face-to-face conversations with God, delivered in the show with the same matter-of-fact quality as any other supernatural event in Springfield. God shows up. They talk. Homer gets divine attention without appearing to seek it or deserve it in any conventional sense. The drunk who falls asleep in church receives the conversation that the devout man next door has been waiting for his entire life. Ned has given everything. He has structured his whole existence around faith in a God he believes is present and attentive. He has, when he has screamed his despair into an empty room, been screaming at something he genuinely believes can hear him. And that something talks to his neighbor, who sleeps through the services and eats donuts during the sermon, and has demonstrated no particular interest in the divine beyond the occasions when the divine shows up and demands his attention. The gap between Ned Flanders and Homer Simpson is the show's most honest statement about how the world actually works. Homer does everything wrong and faces no permanent consequences. Ned does everything right and receives no sustainable reward. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. And the gap between them has never closed, and will never close, because the system they both live inside was not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Molman cycling through his deaths, and everyone exactly where they are, forever, in a loop that has no mechanism for ending. That is Springfield. That is the whole of it, reduced to its simplest possible form. A town where nothing changes, where nobody grows, where time does not pass and consequences do not stick, where the same family sits on the same couch in the same house every week, watching the same television, living the same life, held in place by a loop that we, the audience, chose and kept choosing. The radiation, the coma, the shot that may or may not have been Maggie, the man who is too expensive to die, the town that voted to make the truth illegal, the baby who understands everything and says nothing, the predictions that were not predictions but became real anyway, the mother who kissed her sleeping son goodbye and disappeared into a night that never really ended, the location that is everywhere and nowhere, the timeline that floats because landing would mean ending. All of it, 36 seasons, 788 episodes, and underneath all of it, the same question the show has been quietly asking since the very beginning, without ever quite putting it in words. Why can't we let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Springfield is our town and Homer is our father and Marge is our mother and Bart is the version of ourselves we wanted to be, wild and consequence-free and beloved despite everything. And Lisa is the version we were supposed to be, principled and lonely and still asking questions that nobody around her wants to answer. And Maggie is the version we keep hidden, the one watching everything, understanding more than we let on, waiting for the right moment to finally speak. Or maybe it is simpler than all of that. Maybe we cannot let them go, because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older now, measurably, in ways we cannot undo, that the couch we watched the opening credits from when we were young is in a different house now, or a different decade, or gone entirely. And as long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the door after another day at the plant that should not exist but does, we do not have to admit any of that. We can turn on the television and go home to Evergreen Terrace, to Springfield, to the family that never changes in the town that never ages, in the show that never ends. And it will be there. It always is. That is the whole point. Sleep well. Springfield will still be there when you wake up.